Welcome to the Tech Report podcast, where we help businesses survive, thrive, and create value.
Well, welcome everybody to the Tech Report podcast, the podcast that is all about creating value in today's ever-changing environment. My name is Brad Stoller. I'm going to be the host today. Well, I'm really excited about today's episode as we finally get an opportunity to talk with one of our partners here at Transitional Equity Consultants. The reason I'm so excited about this is that we've had, so many people wonder exactly what it is that Transitional Equity Consultants, what do we do? Okay, so today's episode, it's going to be kind of laser focused on the podiatry industry, which is one of the industries that we really focus on. But you have to understand, these principles will apply to almost any business, but we're going to focus today on the podiatry. So there really has been a strong interest in the podiatry industry lately. As there's just a lot of podiatrists that are wanting to retire. And yet there are also many podiatrists who are really looking for that special partner that can provide some funds and some industry expertise so they can grow much larger than they ever thought was really possible by themselves. So with me, my guest today, JR Rotarius, we both wrote a simple checklist for the podiatrist industry, and we just call it the top 10 ways to maximize your podiatry practice value. So a little bit about the checklist. A checklist is simply that. It's not real deep in information, but there's a checklist, right? So it's just really a guide, if you will, from the point of view of the buyers, not from other doctors, but from the buyers, that we have been working with, over the past couple of years in the podiatry industry. So today we're going to take a deep dive in each one of those 10 areas that we put in our checklist. And again, joining me today is one of Transitional Equity's partners. That's JR Rotarius. JR has been in the M&A industry for a little while. I'm going to let him give a little bit more about his background. But he really has a very good understanding of what private equity for a private equity world is all about, and what buyers are looking for when they are looking to acquire a practice or maybe merge with a practice so they can become a little bit bigger and grow even more. So before we do that, I just want to take a couple of minutes to just let you know a little bit about JR. Joseph JR Rotarius. We all call him JR. You call him, he's called a lot of things, right? I'll let you get back to that. But JR and I but we went through the PGA a few years back. We were both golf professionals. And so JR and we've known each other for a long time, and we're both part of, obviously, Transitional Equity Consultants. But we go back. We used to do some training seminars. We go kind of all across the country. So JR and I, we've been what you call in the golf term ham and egg in it, if you will, and we kind of feed each other off of each other. We both have different viewpoints, but we both have a lot of things that we agree in common. So this should be a pretty good episode. So anyway, so now that you know a little bit about us, I'm JR. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved with the M&A industry, and just so people know a little bit about who you are.
A number of years ago, probably 8 to 10 years ago, I put a deal together to purchase and operate a golf course. And I went through a lot of the different phases and a lot of the different steps and put the right people together. And one of the partners decided that it was, he didn't want any partners, and he decided to do everything on his own and said, "Hey, thanks a lot, but I don't need you." And because of that, and through some other folks that I got to know, they thought, "Hey, this guy knows what he's doing and has the capabilities to help us in some other areas." Said, "Hey, why don't you come and work for us?" So that's how I originally got started in the M&A field. And down the road, I met 3 other partners, Scott Warburton, Sonny Crumpler, and Stephanie Butler. And we all had certain skill sets that we were able to bring and merge together. And so that's how Tech was formed.
Yep, exactly. And I don't know if anybody knows or not, but if you look at right behind me, the word tech, it's spelled wrong, right? That's not, you'd say TECH, right? But TECH actually stands for Transitional Equity Consultants. I've never mentioned that before in this podcast, but that's how this podcast got formed, is really to help business owners. And there you have the story of how TECH came about. A lot of people and JR, you've done extremely well. Okay, well, you really have, but your early days, it wasn't always fun, right? Because you worked your tail off, and it's not easy to break through in the mergers and acquisitions business, is it? There's a lot of things you have to learn. You just like anything else, you make a few mistakes, but overall, those mistakes, you really learn, and you start to understand what really needs to happen, to make a successful transaction, don't you?
Yes.
And that's, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say my partner, Scott Warburton, was an integral part of my success, because in the beginning, I had the skill set to put certain things together, but I lacked a couple of areas that I wasn't as knowledgeable about. Right. And by visiting with him and talking with him, he enlightened me in a few areas, because nobody knows everything when they start.
Right.
But Scott was very astute, because he's been in this business for over 20 years. He was able to shed some light on some things that helped refine what I already knew, but made it a little bit better, so that I could answer questions intelligently and be able to be a real resource for the folks that I got to visit with. And so then that's how little by little you get a little bit better, and
exactly.
Like in anything.
So would you say, and let's just be frank here, okay? So when you first got in the business to try and figure out how to help somebody sell their business, would you say it's fair? Is it fair to say that you did not know everything there was how a transaction works? Would that be fair to say?
That's very fair to say.
How many?
I hate to admit that, but that's fair to say.
Exactly. We all hate to admit that, right? But
that's
how
right.
many transactions you feel you had to actually go through yourself before you felt like you became an expert at it?
Way too many.
Yes, exactly. And
Way
the reason
too
I
many.
asked
I had to go
that,
through a lot.
exactly. The reason I asked that, JR, is you're considered an expert, right? You may be modest, but you are an expert. And so is Scott, and our analyst Sonny is fantastic. Stephanie is fantastic. I've been in the business for a little while now, so we all have that knowledge, but it's taken a few times of, getting the nose bloodied up and getting in battle and all that stuff, and you're learning all the tricks of the trade. How many podiatrists, JR, do you think are out there would be like you in your very first transaction if they tried to do this on their own?
A lot will think that they know, like I wanted to think that I knew.
Yes.
And they will try to do something on their own. And I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of individuals, and through the process, you learn something all the time and every day.
Right.
And so to assume that you know it all, sure, I could get things done early on, just like a doctor or someone trying to sell their business. Anybody would think that they can, and they probably will. But there are so many nuances that are missed, that an expert has, that they think that they know, and their friends are busy telling them, oh yeah, you need to do this and you need to do that, because they like them, they appreciate them, they want to help them,
right.
But they're not experts at it.
Exactly.
We can use that. I'll just use that as in the golf business, just as an analogy. Can I do that?
Oh, heavens, yes.
I can't tell you how many times I would give a golf lesson to somebody years and years ago. Well, my friend told me this, my friend told me that. Well, okay. Your friend likes you, your husband loves you, or your wife loves you, and they're trying to give you beneficial information, but they're not an expert, and they don't realize what they're saying is really incorrect. Their intentions are good.
Right.
And so when someone goes to start their business, if you don't have an expert, we all know that if you're sick, you don't go to Dr. Mom, you go to the real doctor. If you have a legal problem, even though I studied law in school, doesn't make me an attorney, I still go to an attorney. Right. So you need to find who the expert is and use them for what they really are experts for.
Exactly. And so, and the reason I'm framing it up like this is because here comes retirement days, or if somebody starts to thinking about retiring. We're going to focus on the retirement for just a second here, and we'll focus on the other side here, emerging just a second. But the worst place you could actually be is saying, you know what, I am tired. I'm going to sell my practice, and I just got called by, I won't mention any names, and they want to buy my practice. I'm going to do it. JR, what's the problem with that scenario?
Well, as we all know, nobody wants to overpay for a business.
No, come on. They always pay top value. Come on. We're nice guys.
They want to underpay.
Oh, come on.
However, most business owners, in this case, we're talking about doctors, but most business owners do not know the true value of their business.
That's correct.
So they think they know. Well, if someone offers you $5 million for your business, that sounds pretty good. Except when you end up leaving $2 million on the table.
Or more.
And even if you pay a commission of $500,000 or $1 million to somebody, whatever that number may be, you're still money ahead. But they think that they're saving money by not paying a commission or doing something on their own because the number sounds good. And then they realize after the fact, oops, what most business owners don't realize is that the people that are trying to make offers and buy businesses, pardon me, they do that for a living.
Yes, they do.
And they're
good at it.
They know how to
They're good at
put
it.
the little nuances in a letter of intent, or they know how to put things together so it's in their benefit. But you need to have someone on the other side, and it isn't always an attorney, who knows the little nuances of things that were slipped in there.
Right.
Which is hence where our partner Sonny Crumpler comes in, who's pretty darn good at knowing all those little things. And then it's like, oh, I didn't know that. And there's the value of an M&A firm.
Exactly. So now it leads us to why on earth did we write this book, or the checklist, and I think we've covered why. And I think there was a pretty famous attorney years ago, right, that said something about those who represent themselves have a fool for a client. Anybody know who might have said that? JR, do you remember who said that?
Me. No,
you?
No, I do not. No,
well,
I do not know. Tell me.
I say it all the time
please.
too, but it came from Abraham Lincoln. And so, think about that for a second. But anyways, so let's dive in. So we've got 10 areas that we've identified from really the buyer's standpoint. This is feedback from our buyers. And these, we try to put these in importance. Some depend on the business. Number 5 could be more important than 7 in one instance. Number 3 could be more important than number 10 in another instance. But I think overall, this is kind of where it came out. So the problem number 1 that a lot of buyers will look at is, we call it scaling your practice. And JR, as far as scaling the practice, what do we mean by that, and where do podiatrists go wrong, and who does this really affect the most?
Well, the interpretation of scaling the practice is, how can you duplicate it so that it can grow down the road?
Exactly.
And that's the biggest thing that someone who wants to be a partner, when we call them buyers, they want to buy in to be a partner, not to be someone who normally comes in and says, okay, we want to take over and just buy it from you and then leave you hanging.
Exactly.
Most people don't want to do that because there's a lot of love there for that, building that practice. They're attached to it. So you find a good buyer, and then down the road, what ends up happening is you have an exit strategy when the time is right for you, the seller. But to scale is just so that what it really boils down to is, if someone's going to pay you a lot of money for your business, millions of dollars, how are they going to be able to recoup their investment, just like you did when you opened up the doors? And that's what they want to find out, is the scale, how they can scale that and what they can do in addition to that, so that they are able to recoup their investment, and you're happy with the equity that you were able to receive as an offer.
Exactly. Now, a lot of podiatrists, a lot of doctors out there are under the assumption that Yeah, but it's just myself and one other podiatrist. Well, that would be an easy transaction. Why wouldn't they want to buy an easy transaction where it's not as much money? Wouldn't that be more attractive than if I had 8 or 9 or 10 and all of a sudden, man, this could drag out forever. But from a buyer standpoint, how are they viewing that?
Well, if someone got hit by a bus, you're down to one doctor, and that you hurt the practice because you only have one doctor to see the patients of 2 people. When you can have 8 doctors and let the one doctor, if he were to have an unfortunate accident like that, they can absorb those patients, and that's the challenge. Somebody got sick or has a problem, God forbid that someone decides that they don't want to go to work anymore. How can someone take over that business? And the smaller practices are not able to absorb those types of things like the larger practices.
So the podiatrist that's been there for 30 years, maybe 40 years, and he or she is just, I've had enough. I want to move on to the next chapter of my life. I want to travel, whatever it may be. Maybe, hey, you and I know, maybe you just want to play golf every day, whatever it is. So if they leave and they have, maybe their junior partner that's been with them for 20 years, maybe that person's only maybe 40. So they got a few more years that they want to keep on going. But as you just said, what I think I heard you say is, if the main owner retires and you only have 2 in your practice, what happens to your revenue?
It gets cut in half.
It gets cut in half. So therefore, I think we've discovered as to why it's important to scale. Now, we talked about, okay, here's why you want to scale, but how the heck can they do it if they're only 1 or 2? Nobody seems to be that excited about that. At least the big guys coming in and paying them top dollar. So what can they do to get themselves positioned so they can sell, maybe in a year or 2 down the road? What can they do today to scale?
Succession plan. You got to think of what that succession plan is. Do I need to have another doctor or 2 recruit them to be able to come to the practice so that I can minimize my duties so that it can be a very smooth transition and they're not going to miss a beat with being able to accommodate the needs of all their patients.
Right.
And then if you have a good person like a junior partner who wants to stick around and continue operating that business, that's even better, because you can have a smooth transition. You're not going to upset the apple cart. You're not going to cause problems. And there's always that worry. And they're trying to find the easiest way to make a smooth transition, because everybody knows that someone's going to have to retire or do something at some particular point. How have you set your business up is what makes it attractive to a buyer on the other end. And usually that is your succession plan and who else you have that can operate the business, and have you got new doctors that can come in and fill your shoes.
Yeah. So another thing that I know Scott and I were talking about this, not Scott Warburton, who JR referred to, one of our founding partners. But we were talking about this not too long ago, and we were kind of, look, if you're a single podiatrist, if you leave, the business is over. There's no revenue coming in, right? If you have 2 people in, if you leave, you got somebody, hopefully they'll stay around. If they don't have ownership, they're probably going to fly and go someplace and join somebody else, right? But what can you do? And part of that is there's a lot of 1 and 2 and 3 podiatry practices aren't there, JR?
Yes.
So why not, if you're good friends with somebody and they're in the same boat as you are, maybe you could combine and become, let's say, a 4 or 5 podiatry practice. JR, what is the ramifications from that as far as attracting buyers? Is it a little bit of an increase in the interest, or is it monumental when you start getting out 4 or 5, 6 podiatrists versus 1 or 2?
Well, it's monumental because they
Yes.
really want those platforms that they can build around so that they can help that 1 and 2 doctors groups be absorbed when their time comes and they're ready to sell.
Yes.
And they don't have an associate to sell to. They can merge them in to the larger practice. And that's what is very attractive what'll be attractive to a one or a two to be part of a bigger group. But there's a lot of emotion involved in that.
Sure, there is.
And so you have to, help that emotion through there so that, because a lot of them folks don't want to change their culture and they don't want to change certain things. And then others don't mind. So you got to find that balance of both to be able to help that, because, you take pride in what you've done. And if you just give it away, sometimes you'd like to have that be a little longer lasting. And so whatever you can do to help that is beneficial.
Yep, exactly. So we spent a lot of time on number one, and we have 10 things to go through, right? So we have about a 5-hour podcast episode, but I think the reason that JR and I did spend a lot of time on this is because we rank this as number one importance. And we see it all the time where podiatrists want to retire and they come to us and they say, hey, what can you do? Hey, how about, we want the top dollar, right? And that's exactly the expression we have, because there's not much we can do today to help, a client get top dollar if they're only, a 2-person practice. I'm not saying we can't help them, but would you say the multiples, JR, tend to be a little bit lower on, even if somebody does take it, let's say a 2 or 3 practice in, which they do, by the way, but do they pay a higher multiple or a lower multiple of their earnings if they're smaller versus larger?
Well, they get a lower multiple.
Exactly.
But it's not like they're getting nothing.
Exactly.
Okay, because if they're profitable,
Yes.
They're still going to get something.
Exactly.
But you're trying to find a way to help them maximize.
Exactly. You're leaving money on the table. So that's kind of why we put that number one, because from a buyer standpoint, and again, everything on here, and JR and I were talking about this before we started, it is everybody out there when they go to sell their home. Maybe this is a bad example because home prices are going crazy right now, but normally everybody out there who's selling their home, they always think it's worth way more than what it really is, unless they do certain things to fix it up, right? So what we're talking about is your business, and these 10 items are the things to fix it up, if you will, so you can get the highest value. So number 2, now that we know that you really want to build your practice and scale it as much as you can, more you scale it, the more money you're probably going to make. But number 2 on our list of importance, along with scaling your practice, the second is scaling your cost. Now, this kind of goes hand in hand. Okay, the larger you are, you can get some more economies of scale, at least we hope, right? So, but JR, again, tell us a little bit about your viewpoints of why it's so important to not just grow in the number of podiatrists, but use that to your advantage to lower your cost overall, and how that affects the value.
Well, you have to oversee your collections, your payroll, your reimbursements. And that's a lot of time, because the insurance companies don't want to pay. And if you don't fill out your form properly, they're using an excuse as to not pay you.
Exactly.
As a doctor, if you're only 1 or 2, you're the guy doing the front of the house and the back of the house, which doesn't leave you a lot of time.
No.
So you have got to make sure that you at least have somebody who's doing that for you. Are you paying them enough? Are they good at what they do? But that's the scale there of how you can save money or make more money, to be sure that you're following the proper procedures and everything is filled out properly, and you're not putting down extra codes that aren't deserving, or the proper codes are being put down so that they are not going to turn them around and say, wait a minute, we're not accepting that because you did this or you forgot to do that. And so those are the little things, the back office stuff, that make a big difference, which is the biggest headache for most business owners, especially doctors.
Yes. And the moral of the story is, can you afford to pay somebody if you're a 1 or 2 practice? Or if you have a 6 or 7 podiatrist, and it's easier to afford. So not only are you scaling your business, but you're scaling your expenses so you can afford to have somebody more qualified, as JR alluded to make sure there's the right CPC codes in there, and there's less mistakes, which cost you money, right? And again, looking at it from the buyer's standpoint, Are they going to offer more or less to a practice where they know there are mistakes being made and they have to go in and correct it?
Sometimes you can't afford not to pay somebody, because if you
Exactly.
got someone who's that valuable, you just need them.
Yeah.
And they will be there, and they will be worth their weight in gold.
Yes. And another part of the scaling as far as the expenses is concerned is, a volume. If you're doing, 3 or 4 or 5 times the volume of somebody else, you can probably go and negotiate a little bit better price breaks from your vendors. And that's any business, right?
Yes.
So there we go. Okay. So number 2, not just scale your business, but number 2, make sure you scale your expenses so you can get more for your money, so to speak. Buyers love that. Okay, so the third item is make sure you have a good marketing plan. I think I said this wrong. Make sure you have a fantastic marketing plan, because if you don't have people coming in your doors, you can be the best podiatrist and best staff out there. But if you're only seeing 2 patients an hour, I don't want to say who cares, but obviously people hurting really, they like that, and you give personal attention to all that. But if you're not profitable, it's killing you down the road. So, JR, what do you think about the marketing plan? Why, again, what are some of the things that you've noticed that really good podiatrists do to bring clients in the door?
One is bedside manner. They want to make sure that they give their patients, and that has been very beneficial for the practices that we've helped them through their transactions, is to make sure that a customer has a good experience. But that's in anything. They want to have a good experience. And so,
hang on a second.
Okay.
I'm going to interrupt you a second, because you said something, and I thought we were talking about marketing. So what does having a good bedside manner have to do with marketing? And gosh, that doesn't even cost anything. So how can you call that marketing?
Sure, because it's all word of mouth. You know that.
I
know where you're going with that. So it's all word of mouth. And the word of mouth is terrific. And then when people get to see that, I need to go see somebody. Oh, go see my guy. Go here. That works out well. That's just one avenue. You're really good at marketing, and we already know that. This is another question that you could probably answer just as well as me.
I'll have my input in here in just a second. But yeah.
But I can tell you that I will give you the things that we have learned from the folks that we've worked with. Some of them put them up on billboards and do radio advertising, just because it's the last thing you hear. Oh yeah, I should talk to that person. The other thing is they create relationships with other doctors or other industries. Now, these are things that most people probably already know anyway, because that's heavy referral. But it makes it easy when you do that, and you have those relationships that are trusting. You have a good referral source, and the people on the other side know that they're going to be treated well because their reputation is on the line.
Exactly.
There are all sorts of small little things.
And I think you've made a very good point, because what you originally started out with, by good bedside manner, building those relationships with your current clients, you don't necessarily have to pay money to do that. That is just making people feel good, right? So anything you can do to make somebody feel good about their visit, then yeah, it's pretty important. And an example of this, myself, I just went to a podiatrist a couple of weeks ago, because the orthotics that I got, that are getting old, I was starting to have that pain again. And I went in, and I got to tell you, she is phenomenal. I've already told a lot of people about her. So there you go. Did it cost her any money to just educate me while I'm in the office and make sure I understood and get my input? No, it didn't cost her a dime. Well, it cost her a lot of her knowledge and years of, obviously schooling and practice and real experience. But I think if you help somebody understand why they're doing things, it clicks with them. And it's like, and they're going to bring people to your doors. That doesn't cost you anything extra than just opening the door. But some of the other marketing things is, and JR, you alluded to this as well, by contacting, referral partners. And that's where I've noticed the good ones are very good at this. So they get referrals from other practices, not other podiatrists necessarily, but, obviously, referral sources.
Multiple sources, not just other doctors,
Yes.
but hospitals and
Exactly.
surgery centers and you name it.
Exactly. And if you can document this, a buyer is going to love to hear this because they don't necessarily have to mess with it. They know you got it. They just get to plug you into their system, and you've already got a practice built. That's what they want, right? They don't want to have to go in and revamp everything. It's too much work. The return on their investment all of a sudden is not as great. So guess what? They're not probably going to pay you as much because they're going to have to invest themselves. It's better that you do it and get a little more when you go to sell. Isn't that right, JR?
Yes. Now I will just add one thing to that. When we get to the end, the more of these 10 questions that you have will create more value for your business, because that's just like you just said, that's less that a potential buyer or acquirer or partner will have to do because everything is already in place.
Yep, exactly.
And so if you're going to merge you and me together, and you've got yours and I've got mine, but we both have got the same qualities and we can put them together, they overlap and they help each other as opposed to having to start over. So, yeah.
Exactly. So, okay. So I think we're starting to get a pattern here, but the fourth thing on our list, and again, some of these again are just because the number 4 for what we're putting down here today doesn't necessarily mean it's 4 for you, but it could be number 6 on your list. Whatever, it doesn't really make any difference. I think the important thing is you understand it. But number 4 on our list, maximize your ancillary services. And I know that, JR, I wish Scott could have been here today, and he wasn't able to join us here today, but we had talked a lot about this, and Scott is just adamant about this. Because I know that we've all talked to buyers, we've all talked to podiatrists, the sellers, if you will. But a lot of the buyers are very strong. They feel very strongly, and they're willing to pay, not premium, but they're paying more. When your practice is doing those added value things, such as, nobody leaves without orthotics. If you let them walk, literally, and they're still in pain, maybe you're not just doing them a service anyhow. But I know that every podiatrist I've ever been, I walk out with a new custom orthotics, but they work, and I love them for it. If you take the attitude of, I don't want to build this, and I don't want to make them mad, you're not making anybody mad. You're doing them a disservice, not just to them, but you're also doing this disservice to your own practice when you go to sell, because that is high profit items. And I know Scott had mentioned something about a lot of podiatrists, JR, would you agree that they farm out the insoles, the inserts, if you will, and
far too much,
and you're leaving money on the table when you do that, and they're not hard to do. So think of a way how you can do it in your practice where you can start pulling that in-house and make another profit center. High profit centers are where you're going to get your value. Isn't that right, JR?
Well, yes, that, and if you can have an in-house surgery center, doctors get paid, rough guess, $1,000 to do a surgery, a simple surgery, when they do it in-house, because they get paid differently. But if you go to the hospital, they only maybe get $100, $200, $300. So if you do that in-house, that's just far more profit. Now, of course, there's an expense to get things started. We all know that, but it will more than pay for itself down the road. We're talking about the inserts, but some of them do shoes. And you got the ambulatory centers or wound care, anything that you can add. And that's where partners come in sometimes, because if they not everybody has the financial ability and capability to be able to add all these, but the more that you can add or have opportunity to add or have set in place, that's where a partner will really help you down the road.
Exactly. So I think we look at your own practice, and we're not necessarily the ones to tell you, hey, here's 10 things you should be having in your office. I will say that, JR, we work with the guys at top practices. Okay. That's Rem Jackson and Dr. Peter Wishney, who is a podiatrist. And I think Rem's the only non-podiatrist that's in the Podiatric Hall of Fame. They know their stuff. So if you're a smaller practice or you're not sure what to do with that, rather than have us tell you, I'm just going to refer you to get with Rem Jackson or Dr. Wishney. It's called toppractices.com. They are extremely good at knowing those little tricks of the trade. And rather than us to tell you and struggle, I'm going to say, hey, look, let's partner up with them and let's refer you over to them so they can help teach you and build you up, while you're kind of putting your plan together. Maybe it might be 5 years, it could be 10 years down the road. Listen to what they say. It's not expensive. I know it's not, but they have an incredible group that kind of help you with this. So, and actually all of these too, but we want to bring these to your attention. That's the purpose of today. So let's move on. Maximizing your reimbursements, number 5. JR, I know you are passionate about this one. Talk to us about how they can maximize. What are some of the things they should be doing to maximize their reimbursements?
Well, I will tell you this. Most doctors do a pretty darn good job of trying to maximize their reimbursements and getting paid. The negotiation of the reimbursements is key. That's key. And the smaller practices are a little bit of a disadvantage. Even if you're small, you can work together with other small groups and as one big group to do those negotiations. Making sure that you follow the Medicare guidelines like we talked about earlier, and make sure that you're billing accordingly, because we've had a few others that billed incorrectly, and then you get an audit, and then all of a sudden you find out, oops, I made a mistake.
Right.
And they're looking to cause you to pay back that and then some and the other things. And so in order to maximize your reimbursements, you want to try to follow the guidelines to the T and get the right negotiated reimbursements through these with these insurance companies. But most doctors really know that already. That's a key thing that they're all astute on most of the time anyway.
And one thing that, and JR, I think you alluded to this earlier when we were talking about scaling your expenses. This is one of those areas too. My wife has worked in the ophthalmology industry for years, and she did the billings and she knew the CPC codes in and out. And what she would always say is, man, if they would just bill instead of calling it this, they need to bill it at this. It's the same. This is where it should be. And the reimbursement is so much better. And they keep billing it at that one. So she would find these things and she would go report to the doctors, and they said, oh my gosh, we never knew that. So I think one of the things on here is, man, have somebody on your staff that understands this extremely well, where they can catch mistakes. And JR, you kind of alluded to this earlier. Every state's a little different as far as the reimbursement. So get somebody, pay for the training. It's, oh my gosh, can it ever, it is so worth your investment to pay and have somebody on staff to do that and catch those things, isn't it, JR?
Well, doesn't that just go back to what we talked about in about number 1 or 2 when it said
it does. Number
you
2.
Can't afford not to have somebody who's that competent that can help you with that?
Yep.
Your wife proved how valuable she really was.
Exactly.
To that
and again,
medical group.
Exactly. And it goes back and it affects, we're going to get to this last one here, but it affects your financials tremendously. And those financials ultimately are what those buyers are going to pay. So yes, very, very important. So anything else on maximizing reimbursements, or should we move on?
I think we should move on.
I do too.